Chapter 17. The Triton. The spare security card had a silver key ring attached to a yellow and blue foam flounder. Shelley had stolen it from a drawer in her mother's home office the night before, and now, with Enrique by her side, she swiped the security card, then slid the key into the lock. The new security system frightened her. Her father had it installed after a recent series of strange burglary attempts. The police thought it had been local teens, but Shelley wondered if it was something far more insidious. Ursula. What if they were wrong and she could leave the bay? The foam flounder bobbed around and she held her breath, then twisted. The bolts turned and released, admitting them into the dark aquarium. Enrique gave her a thumbs up. Nice work. They slipped through the side entrance and followed the corridor down the main hall. The main lights were out, but the exhibits were still lit with their signature blue-green light that cast eerie shadows through the cavernous space. The aquarium felt totally different after hours, when the tourists had cleared out, leaving their sticky residue behind. No kids played tag, carrying around the exhibits, or pressed their noses to the glass. No parents chased them, looking exhausted. Instead, it was quiet and foreboding. Not even staff were there. The Sea Witch was watching. She'd know if they failed. They couldn't let that happen. Suddenly, Shelley felt short of breath, like her lungs couldn't get enough oxygen. Enrique glanced back at her in alarm. He noticed her struggling to keep up. What's wrong? He asked. I'm having a hard time breathing, she managed, still gasping for air. Her lungs were screaming at her. It feels like my lungs suddenly aren't working. He pulled her toward the nearest tank. Hurry, over here. I have an idea. What do you mean? She gasped. Where are you taking me? Maybe it's the gills, he said, leading her to a small tank and removing the top. Fish can't breathe out of water, remember? And you're turning into a fish, she said, recalling zombie Mr. Bubbles saying, You're going to go belly up. Just try it, Enrique said, and she dunked her head into the tank on command. As soon as the salt water hit her gills, it was like she could breathe again. Really breathe. Gradually, her lungs stopped screaming. She pulled her head out with a frightened expression. Their eyes met. He held her gaze. That means not much time left, she finished in barely a whisper. Her eyes fell on the main exhibit that towered over the hall. The reef shark darted around the Triton, coasting by the pirate ship. Enrique followed her gaze. How are we going to get it? Superpowers, remember? She said, stripping off her scarf and gloves, revealing her hands, which were now more fish than human. It's really progressing, huh? He said. Your hands weren't like this yesterday. She nodded, faster than before. Her lungs constricted. She was gasping for oxygen. Let's go, she said, pulling him toward the main exhibit into the staff-only area. I need to hurry up and get into the tank, or I'm going to have trouble breathing again. They hurried down an echoing stairwell into the bowels of the exhibit, where few got to go. There, it looked and felt industrial, and at night, almost sinister. The space behind the scenes consisted of metal, scaffolding, rusty ladders, and other equipment. She led Enrique over to a ladder that ran up the side of the main exhibit. Light from the tank washed over them as they climbed up and onto the catwalk that spanned the tank. Shelley looked down at the rippling water, illuminated by its artificial light. There were sharks in the tank, but she wasn't really afraid. You know, something's been bothering me, Enrique said, shooting her a worried look. He balanced on the catwalk beside her, wobbling. What's that? What's that? Shelley unzipped her hoodie to reveal her wetsuit beneath. It's almost like the sea witch knew this curse would help you get the Triton for her, because it's easy for you to swim into the tank. It's like this was part of her plan all along. Shelley gulped. Maybe you're right. She's evil and wicked smart, he said with a shake of his head. She tricked you. Shelley handed him an oxygen mask and fins. Here, since you don't have superpowers like me and all. He laughed, then pulled on the mask. She switched on the oxygen line. He gave her another thumbs up. Then they clambered farther down the catwalk. It was slippery and narrow. She never swum inside the main exhibit. It was dangerous with sharks and other animals, not to mention the hazards of diving with an oxygen line. One needed to be a trained professional, but she might as well have been. They hovered over the pirate ship. She could just see it through the rippling water. Here goes nothing, she said, diving into the tank with a soft splash. Enrique followed, landing with a churn of bubbles beside her. He was clumsier in the water with all the gear, but she was practically a fish now. She cut through the tank, diving toward the ship, past it and the faux treasure chest. The Triton stood before her, skewering the sand. Enrique caught up. Without thinking, he reached out to grab the Triton, but she batted his hand away just in time. A bolt of electricity shot out from the Triton, nearly zapping him. Let me, she said, and somehow her voice rang out clear as day through the water. He nodded. Suddenly, warning voices sounded. Don't trust her. She lies. But then she looked down at her feet, which were fully turning into fins now, and over and at Enrique, remembering the sea witch's threat to turn him into one of her writhing creatures. She had to reverse the curse. She had to help the sea witch. She grasped the Triton. Though it seemed to be wedged in the sand, at her touch it came loose with surprising ease. No electric shocks zapped her. Then, all at once, the barnacles fell away, revealing a gleaming golden weapon. She felt great power emanating from the ancient weapon, but also danger. Suddenly, alarms sounded. Removing the Triton must have triggered them. They had to get out of there before the police came. Enrique gave her a startled look. Together they swam upward, but his oxygen line got snagged on the pirate ship and came unplugged. He struggled to free himself, unable to breathe. Then suddenly, the reef sharks darted toward Shelley. The shark looked agitated too, like something had gotten into him. An unnatural emerald light flashed in the shark's eyes, part of the enchantment to protect the Triton. The shark cracked open its jaws and zeroed in on the Triton. Shelley tried to swim away to help get Enrique to the surface, but the shark latched on to the Triton with its huge jaws. It began to wrench it from her hand as she fought to drive it away. Meanwhile, Enrique struggled toward the surface, but Shelley feared he wouldn't make it without her help. She could let go of the Triton and save Enrique, but then the curse would last forever. She gripped the Triton harder. Please, help me, she thought. Suddenly, she felt power emanated through the Triton and explode in a blast of green light that blew the shark back through the water. But the shark recovered and darted for Enrique. Shelley pivoted and swam toward Enrique, snatching him just as the shark snapped at his torso and missed. But they weren't out of danger yet. The shark darted around to attack again. Shelley felt something slip out of her pocket. It was the Nautilus. It drifted to the bottom of the exhibit, where it settled in the sand next to the treasure chest. She started to swim for it, but the shark charged at them again. Without wasting another second, Shelley hooked her arm around Enrique and swam fast for the surface. She saw his eyes were closed. He needed oxygen right away. The shark was right on her heels and starting to close in on them. Shelley tried to swim faster, but even with her fish abilities, Enrique and the Triton were slowing her down. She kicked harder, feeling her fins claw against the water. Finally, she burst through the surface and up the ladder, dragging Enrique onto the catwalk with her last remaining strength. At that moment, the shark's open mouth broke the surface, missing his dangling leg by inches. The Triton clattered down on the catwalk with a metallic rattle. The alarms continued blaring, along with the emergency lights flashing overhead. Shelley turned her attention back toward Enrique. "Come on! Wake up!" she yelled, shaking Enrique. He had once saved her. She couldn't fail him. He coughed, then flipped over and spat out salt water. He gasped for air and breathed deeply. "Oh, thank the seven seas," Shelley said with a rush of relief. "You scared me." He coughed again. "Did you get it?" he asked. "Yes, but us being here after hours must have triggered the alarms. We have to get out of here." She helped Enrique to his feet, and he staggered unsteadily on the catwalk. While the alarms kept blaring, they hurried back to the entrance. But when they got there, the doors wouldn't open. Shelley tried the keys and the security card. Nothing worked. "We're trapped. It must be a security measure," Enrique said. "It's probably alerting the authorities." She swallowed hard. "Or my parents." Shelley felt their time ticking away. Her lungs screamed for oxygen now that she was out of the tank. It was getting worse fast. She couldn't risk getting trapped or caught by her parents. They didn't have much time left to take the Triton to Ursula's lair. Any second they'd be busted, and then it would be too late. "What do we do?" she gasped. They couldn't escape the way they came in. It was getting harder for her to breathe by the second. Her mind felt sluggish. She clutched the Triton tightly. "What about the shell?" asked Enrique. "The one that takes you to Ursula's lair? I dropped it in the exhibit when the shark came after you." They both turned to look. The shark was circling the shell. They couldn't risk going back into the tank. The shark would attack them again. And this time, they might not be so lucky. Shelley met Enrique's eyes. She could tell that they were both thinking the same thing. What now?